I never thought a simple dinner at my house could turn into a nightmare. That evening started like any other, or so I thought. The sky was fading into that soft orange dusk, and the neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. I was in the kitchen, arranging the plates and glasses for my guest, making sure everything looked perfect. The scent of roasted vegetables and garlic filled the air, and I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. It was supposed to be a normal, relaxing night. I even allowed myself a little chuckle, thinking about how seriously our HOA takes even the smallest things, like the exact height your mailbox can be or whether your welcome mat is HOA approved. As I wiped the counter for what felt like the fifth time, I caught a flicker of movement outside my window. Two figures were lingering near the edge of my driveway, their posture stiff, eyes locked on my front door. My stomach sank. It wasn't unusual for our HOA security to patrol the streets. They prided themselves on being the self-appointed neighborhood police, but something about tonight felt different. They weren't just walking by, they were watching, and it made my skin crawl. Then came the car. The headlights lit up the driveway, and I could see my guest stepping out with that same warm, unassuming smile she always wore. She waved at me, and for a brief moment I felt normal again. I waved back, trying to push down the growing sense of unease. "Hey, just ignore the weirdos in the driveway," I whispered under my breath, and she laughed, her voice light and full of warmth. I opened the door to greet her. She stepped in and handed me a bottle of wine, and for a second everything seemed okay. I tried to joke about the HOA just to break the tension. "If my lawn isn't exactly 2.5 inches tall, they'll probably fine me for neglect," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the window. She laughed again, and for a moment the world felt normal. But then I heard it, a sharp knock on the door. I froze. The knock wasn't friendly, it was deliberate, almost aggressive. Before I could even respond, the door opened, and two HOA guards were standing there, their faces grim, eyes scanning my guest as if she had committed some unimaginable crime. "Good evening," I said, forcing a smile. "Can I help you?" They didn't answer. One of them stepped forward, blocking my guest from entering. His voice was low and firm. "Ma'am, you're violating HOA rules. You can't be here." I blinked, stunned. "Excuse me, she's my guest. She's allowed to be here." The guard's eyes didn't waver. He was serious, and that seriousness made my stomach twist. He stepped closer, and I instinctively moved to stand beside my guest. "I'm sorry, but we have to enforce the rules," he said. The other guard nodded, arms crossed, like they were about to start some kind of interrogation. My guest didn't flinch. She stood tall, calm, and collected, giving them a polite smile. "Hello," she said. "I'm just visiting my friend for dinner. I don't believe I'm breaking any rules." Their expressions didn't change. They looked at her like she had just confessed to a felony. I felt panic creeping up my spine. I tried again in a tone that was half joking, half serious, hoping to diffuse the tension. "Look, you've got the wrong person. This is my guest. She's not doing anything wrong. Maybe take a step back." The first guard's lips pressed into a thin line. The second guard glanced at him, then back at my guest. Suddenly, the air felt thick, almost electric, like something bad was about to happen. My mind raced, thinking about the worst-case scenarios. What if they actually tried to force her out? What if neighbors got involved? I swallowed hard. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "She's just here for dinner, nothing else. We don't want any trouble." The guards exchanged a quick, tense look. I noticed one of them twitch slightly, almost like he was holding himself back. My guest, unfazed, simply smiled politely, tilting her head in a way that was both confident and unnerving. There was something about her presence that made me pause. She seemed untouchable, calm, yet somehow commanding. As I watched the scene unfold, I realized that tonight was no longer about a simple dinner. It was about how far these guards were willing to go to assert their authority, and whether I could keep my cool long enough to protect my guest. I had no idea that the night was about to spiral into a story I would tell for years, a story full of tension, fear, and a twist I could never have predicted. The knock on the door sounded again, sharper this time, and I felt my heart leap. I braced myself. Whatever happened next, I knew my quiet suburban life would never be the same. The air felt heavier with every passing second. The guards didn't move, and I could feel the tension radiating off them in waves. It was like standing in the middle of a storm you couldn't control. I stepped slightly forward, placing myself between them and my guest. "Look, there's no reason for this to get out of hand," I said, my voice trying to stay calm but trembling just a little. The first guard's jaw tightened. "We're enforcing the rules, you know the rules." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but it didn't feel like the time for humor yet. "Rules? She's my guest. She's inside my property. That's literally allowed." His eyes narrowed. "You don't understand. She's trespassing. She's in violation of the HOA code." Trespassing, violation of the HOA code? I felt my blood pressure spike. I had read those rules dozens of times, memorized them even. Nothing she was doing remotely qualified. I tried again in a tone sharper now, more forceful. "She is not breaking any rules. She is allowed here. Now step back before this gets out of hand." The second guard shifted, crossing his arms. His stare was cold, calculating, like he was weighing whether I was bluffing or not. My guest stayed completely still, calm and composed, her eyes locked on the first guard. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't say a word. I could see it now. She wasn't just confident, she radiated authority, authority that made the guards hesitate, even if only slightly. "I don't think you understand your position here," the first guard said, his voice low, almost a growl. I felt a surge of protectiveness for my guest. I had no idea why these people were acting this way, but I wasn't about to let them push her around. "I understand perfectly," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You have no right to harass my guest. Now step back." One of them twitched, and I realized things could escalate fast. My mind raced. Should I call the police? Would that make it worse? I didn't want my quiet street turning into a scene straight out of a TV drama, but something told me we were already past that point. My guest finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen, I am here as my friend's guest. I am not violating any laws or rules. Please step aside." There it was, that quiet, simple statement that held more weight than anything I had said. It was almost unnerving how composed she was. I could feel the guards hesitate, like they were suddenly unsure if they could touch her. I, on the other hand, was panicking on the inside, trying not to show it. I glanced at the window, hoping maybe some neighbor would intervene or at least witness what was happening. Some heads peeked out, curious, some filming on their phones. The thought made my stomach churn. If this went viral, it wouldn't just be an embarrassment, it could get dangerous. Suddenly, the first guard stepped forward slightly, his hand reaching toward her arm. My heart leapt into my throat. "Hey!" I shouted, stepping in between them, my hands raised. "Don't touch her." The guard froze just for a second, and in that second, I realized how serious things had become. This wasn't about lawn heights or mailbox colors anymore. This was about control, about intimidation, and I was witnessing it unfold in my own driveway. I tried reasoning with them one last time. "Look, you are not handling this correctly. She is allowed here. If you continue this, there will be consequences." The tension was suffocating. The second guard took a step forward, and my guest's eyes followed him, unflinching and yet calm. There was a weight to her presence that made me uneasy and amazed at the same time. I couldn't understand it yet, but I knew she wasn't just any ordinary guest. The first guard muttered something under his breath, almost inaudible. The second guard glanced at him, eyes darting nervously, and I could feel the hesitation. Something had changed, though I didn't know what. The situation was teetering on a knife's edge. Any moment, any wrong move, and it could spiral completely out of control. My mind raced. What if they actually tried to force her out? What if neighbors got involved? What if it turned physical? I could feel my heart pounding, sweat forming on my forehead. I wished I had planned for this scenario, but nothing in my life had prepared me for this. And then, just as the tension seemed unbearable, I noticed it. One of the guards blinked, his shoulders stiffened, and the air seemed to shift. Something about her made them hesitate, made them question what they were about to do. I didn't know it yet, but that hesitation would change everything. And I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The night was far from over. Whatever was about to happen next would make me question everything I thought I knew about my quiet, suburban life, and about the power of a single guest in the wrong, or maybe right, place at the wrong time. The second the tension hit its peak, everything seemed to happen at once. One of the guards lunged forward slightly like he was testing the waters, and my stomach dropped. I stepped instinctively in front of my guest, my hands raised, my voice louder than I intended. "Hey, back off, now." The guard froze, but only for a second. The other one started moving toward her from the side, his expression hard, eyes fixed, like he was certain he was in the right. I could feel the panic bubbling inside me. This was not going to end politely. "What are you doing?" I shouted. "She is my guest. She has a right to be here." My guest didn't move. She didn't panic. She just tilted her head slightly, calm, almost regal, and her eyes held the kind of composure that made the guards hesitate for a fraction of a second longer than they probably should have. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I was powerless to stop this if it escalated physically. One of them reached out, and that's when I acted. I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. "I said back off," I yelled. My guest stepped back, hands raised in a calm, almost meditative stance, like she was ready for anything, yet completely unafraid. The first guard's expression changed. Surprise flickered across his face, then irritation, and then, finally, confusion. The second guard hesitated mid-step, glancing at his partner, and I could see the tension in their bodies. Neighbors had started to gather, peeking over fences, peeking from windows, some holding their phones, filming everything. I could feel the eyes of the entire street on us. The adrenaline coursing through me made my hands shake, and I realized how absurd this must have looked to anyone watching. A man yelling at two guards while his guest stood calmly like a statue. And then it happened. The first guard pushed, just a little, not enough to hurt, but enough to make contact. My guest didn't flinch. Instead, she looked directly at him, her gaze steady and unnerving, and said, "Step back, now." My stomach lurched. It was her tone, calm but unyielding, that made me freeze for a second. He blinked, as if struck by something unseen. His arm dropped slightly, and the second guard took a cautious step back, muttering under his breath. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. I kept yelling at them, half out of fear, half out of disbelief. "Do you understand me? She is not leaving. She is not breaking any rules. Step away." For a moment, nothing happened. Then one of the guards made a sudden movement toward her, almost reflexive, and I reacted without thinking. I grabbed his arm again, trying to pull him back. Neighbors were gasping, whispering, filming. It felt like the entire street was watching a live drama unfold. My guest stayed completely still, calm, and unshakable. I realized at that moment that her calmness was almost magical. The guards, for all their posturing, were hesitant now, unsure, maybe even scared, and I had no idea why. The situation escalated again. The first guard muttered something I couldn't hear, the second one shifted nervously, and suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't my guest, it was the first guard trying to steady himself. But the way he touched me, it was like he was trying to assert authority while also questioning his own judgment. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me, trying to think clearly. This was my house, my guest, my responsibility. And yet I felt completely powerless. I could see them arguing quietly between themselves, whispering, hesitant to make a move. The tension was almost unbearable. I glanced at my guest again. She hadn't moved an inch. She hadn't raised her voice. But the calm in her eyes told me that she was in control in ways I couldn't understand. The guards didn't know it yet, but they were no longer in control. The power had shifted slowly, almost imperceptibly, and I could feel it. And then, just as the moment seemed unbearable, one of them stepped back completely. His partner followed, and the space between my guest and the guards widened. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. I exhaled shakily, my heart still hammering. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, my hands trembling. The chaos of the moment had been real, tangible, and terrifying. I realized something in that instant. This night was only beginning. The confrontation had escalated, yes, but the real twist, the one I couldn't have anticipated, was still waiting for us. The neighborhood had witnessed the beginning of a battle that no one expected. A battle that would change everything about how we all saw authority, rules, and the quiet suburban life we thought we knew. And I had no idea what was coming next, only that it was going to be far worse, or far stranger, than I could have ever imagined. The moment felt frozen in time. The guards had stepped back, but I could feel their hesitation like a weight pressing down on the driveway. My guest stood there, calm, composed, almost impossibly still. It was as if the entire neighborhood had stopped breathing, waiting for the next move, waiting to see who would blink first. I could feel my own heartbeat hammering in my chest. Then she spoke, her voice calm and steady, slicing through the tension like a knife. "Gentlemen, I am the district attorney." Time stopped. My brain stuttered. Did I hear that correctly? The words barely registered at first. I froze in place, staring at her. The guards froze as well. Their expressions shifted, confusion and fear flickering across their faces like a faulty light. I felt my stomach drop. Suddenly, all the aggression, all the bluster they had displayed seconds ago, evaporated in an instant. I could hear my own thoughts racing, loud and ridiculous. Wait, the district attorney? Here, in my driveway, what does that even mean? Are we about to get arrested? Am I about to be sued? My guest continued, calm and unbothered, like she was lecturing a class of misbehaving children. "I am here as my friend's guest. Any further interference on your part could have serious legal consequences." The first guard's face went pale. His lips pressed into a thin line, his hands twitching as if he wasn't sure what to do with them. The second guard glanced nervously at his partner, their eyes darting back and forth, searching for a plan that didn't exist. It was like watching two cartoon characters suddenly realize the ground beneath them was lava. I tried to regain control, but my voice came out shaky. You're the district attorney?" I asked, hoping it was some kind of joke, but her calm gaze told me it was. She gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make my stomach twist in knots. The absurdity of the situation hit me. Here I was, standing in my driveway, trying to defend my guest from two guards who had no idea who they were confronting. My guest, calm and unflinching, was literally more powerful than anyone in the neighborhood, and I was caught in the middle, wondering if I was about to witness a legal apocalypse. The neighbors had gathered quietly along the street, whispering and peeking from windows. Some were filming with their phones, some just staring in disbelief. The tension was so thick I could feel it on my skin. The guards' postures slumped, like their bravado had been drained away by her presence. The fear in their eyes was palpable. My mind was spinning, trying to process what just happened. So she's the law, and I'm in the middle of this mess. What does this mean for me? For my house? For the HOA? I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved that my guest wasn't in any real danger, terrified because I had no idea how badly this could blow up. One of the guards muttered something under his breath, and the other grabbed his arm to hush him. I caught snippets. We didn't know, we can fix this." The fear was evident. The authority that they had wielded just minutes ago evaporated in an instant. My guest's calmness was almost unnerving. She looked directly at them, unblinking, and said, "I suggest you leave now, and think carefully about how you enforce rules in the future." They hesitated again, looking at me as if to silently ask, "What do we do now?" I shrugged, unsure if I should intervene or let the situation resolve itself. The tension was unbearable, but also oddly satisfying. It was like watching justice unfold in slow motion, right there on my driveway. Finally, almost reluctantly, the guards began to step back, murmuring excuses. My guest didn't relax, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge them. She simply remained composed, commanding, untouchable. The moment the last guard crossed back onto the sidewalk, I exhaled a long, shaky breath. The adrenaline in my system was still surging, my hands trembling, but for the first time, I felt a strange mixture of relief and awe. I looked at her, my guest still perfectly composed. I had no idea," I stammered. She gave a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes people forget who holds the power," she said softly. I realized then that this night was far from over. The guards had backed down, yes, but the consequences for the HOA for their arrogance, and for anyone who thought they could intimidate me or my guest, were only just beginning. And deep down, I knew that the rest of the neighborhood was watching, learning a lesson they wouldn't forget anytime soon. As we finally stepped inside, the door closing behind us, I couldn't help but laugh nervously. I had survived the confrontation, but the real story, the one that would shake the entire HOA, was only just beginning. As soon as the door clicked shut behind us, I felt a strange mix of relief and tension. The guards were gone, at least physically, but their shadow seemed to linger in the driveway, in the air, like a warning. My guest, still composed, set her bag down and sat at the dining table as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I couldn't stop packing, replaying every second, every twitch of the guards' faces, every pause that had felt like eternity. I peeked out the window, expecting to see neighbors whispering, filming, or worse, gossiping already. Of course they were. A few were still leaning over their fences, eyes wide, phones raised. I imagined the conversations now. Did you see what just happened? Who even is she? Is that legal? The thought made my stomach churn. My quiet street had turned into a stage, and we were the main act. Just when I thought the tension couldn't get higher, the phone rang. It was the HOA president. My chest sank. I didn't answer immediately, hoping the moment might pass, but the persistent ringing reminded me that avoidance wasn't an option. Finally, I picked up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Is everything all right?" the president asked, his voice tight, almost trembling. "We heard about tonight." I didn't respond immediately. There was no good way to explain what had just happened. The guards had been humiliated, yes, but there was no turning back now. "Everything's fine," I said carefully, trying to sound calm, though my mind screamed otherwise. "It's handled." There was a pause. I could hear him swallowing audibly on the other end. "Well, we just want to make sure no rules were broken," his voice trailed off. I smiled dryly, imagining how ridiculous it must sound over the phone. "No rules were broken," I repeated firmly, letting my voice carry the weight of authority, even though I wasn't the one in charge anymore. After hanging up, I sank into a chair, exhausted. My guest sipped her water quietly, observing me with that calm, unwavering gaze. I felt simultaneously protected and terrified. She had stopped the guards without raising a hand, without threatening, and yet the power she held was palpable. It made me question everything I thought I knew about authority. The next hours were a blur of phone calls, whispers, and what-ifs. I could hear the HOA scrambling in the background, emails sent to members trying to spin the story, phone calls to neighbors attempting damage control, nervous discussions behind closed doors. It was like watching a panicked animal trying to cover up a mistake it had no way to fix. I peeked outside again and saw the guards sitting in their car, whispering urgently. They kept glancing toward my house, clearly unsure of what to do next. Every so often, one would shake his head and slam the car door lightly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just moments ago, they had acted like they owned the street. Now they were hesitant, powerless, and probably wondering how their lives had become so complicated. The neighborhood chatter was relentless. Whispers of, "Did you hear about the district attorney?" and "What happened at his house?" drifted through the air like wildfire. I knew the story would travel fast. What started as a simple dinner had now become the talk of the community, and I had no idea how far it would go. I tried to distract myself by helping my guest with the wine, offering a plate of food, pretending that everything was normal. But normal didn't exist anymore. The guards, failed intimidation, the HOA president's calls, the neighborhood gossip, all of it had shifted the balance. For the first time in years, the HOA seemed vulnerable. And yet the suspense hung over everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The guards had been humiliated, yes, but they would likely return, trying to assert some kind of authority, maybe even more aggressively. The president would convene meetings, try to rewrite rules, attempt to spin the events to save face. I knew we hadn't seen the last of the drama. I glanced at my guest again. She hadn't said much since the initial confrontation, but I could tell she was already thinking several steps ahead. Her calmness was unnerving but also reassuring. I realized then that her presence wasn't just a shield. It was a warning to anyone who dared to overstep, and I had the front row seat to it all. As the night deepened and shadows stretched across my living room, I sat back, trying to process everything. The adrenaline was fading, but the tension remained. The HOA was reeling, the guards were shaken, and the entire street had witnessed something extraordinary. I knew that tomorrow would be worse. The whispers, the subtle digs, the attempts at control. But I also knew we had won the first battle. Little did I know, the showdown was only going to escalate from here. The events of this night would ripple through the HOA, through the guards, and through my own life in ways I could never have predicted. And as I looked at my guest, calm and collected, I realized that the next steps would require careful maneuvering, strategy, and perhaps a little bit of revenge. The next morning, the neighborhood felt tense, almost like the air itself was holding its breath. I stepped outside cautiously, coffee in hand, and noticed the usual morning bustle had an edge to it. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, some whispering in clusters, others glancing toward my house as if expecting the next incident to unfold at any moment. I could feel their curiosity and fear like static electricity in the air. The guards were already on patrol, but this time their movements were hesitant, calculated, almost mechanical. Their eyes darted nervously toward my driveway, checking, assessing, probably wondering if the district attorney had decided to stick around for another visit. I could see their unease, and it made me smirk quietly to myself, though I kept it hidden behind my coffee mug. The phone rang again. It was the HOA president. I picked up reluctantly, bracing myself for whatever damage control nonsense they were trying this time. "Hello," I said cautiously. We wanted to discuss the events from last night," he stammered. I could practically hear the sweat dripping down his metaphorical forehead. I leaned against the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sure, what exactly do you want to discuss?" There was a long pause. I imagined him packing, probably rehearsing excuses, thinking of how to spin two guards humiliating themselves in front of a district attorney as anything other than a disaster. "Well, we just want to ensure that no rules were broken and that this won't escalate further." I blinked. "You're worried about escalation. It's already escalated. Your guards humiliated themselves. Your members are gossiping. Your credibility is on the line. Maybe focus on that." He coughed nervously. We'll handle it internally." I smiled to myself. The absurdity was delicious. "Good luck," I said lightly and hung up. I stepped outside and noticed the guards standing awkwardly near my mailbox. They pretended to inspect something, anything, but their body language screamed uncertainty. They glanced nervously toward my guest, who had stepped out with me, calm, composed, unbothered by their presence. She moved slowly, deliberately, her gaze carrying the kind of quiet authority that made the guards step back almost instinctively. The tension in the street was palpable. Neighbors whispered behind hedges, some filming, some just staring. I could sense the fear that had replaced the usual arrogance of the HOA. It was almost intoxicating. The power balance had shifted overnight, and everyone in the neighborhood could feel it. As the day progressed, subtle attempts at control became evident. The guards tried to maintain their patrols, but every movement was cautious, hesitant, lacking the confidence they had before. The HOA president made rounds, attempting to assert authority with polite smiles and awkward waves, but it was clear that he was treading on thin ice. Every step felt like a misstep waiting to happen. I watched it all with a mixture of amusement and satisfaction, but also annoying suspense. The situation was far from over. They were desperate to regain control, and desperation can lead to reckless actions. I kept checking my windows, waiting for the next scene, wondering what they might try next, and knowing that it could escalate in ways none of us could predict. My guest remained calm throughout, sipping her water, observing the scene with an almost surgical detachment. She didn't need to intervene. Her presence alone was enough to unsettle them. The guards were aware of it, even if they didn't fully understand why. They were caught in a web of authority they had underestimated, and it was mesmerizing to watch. As evening approached, subtle messages arrived. Text messages from neighbors, rumors spreading, and even small inquiries from the HOA itself, trying to assess the situation. It was clear they were desperate to contain the fallout. I realized then that the story had already begun to take on a life of its own. The chaos of last night had not only embarrassed the guards, but had also thrown the entire HOA hierarchy into disarray. And yet the suspense lingered. I knew this was only the calm before the storm. The guards would likely try again, perhaps in a bolder, more reckless way. The president would attempt more meetings, more explanations, maybe even threats. I could feel the tension building, the anticipation that something had to give, and I knew that when it did, it would be spectacular. As I watched the street grow quiet with the fading light, I realized one thing. The power had shifted, yes, but the real test was yet to come. The next confrontation, the ultimate showdown, was approaching, and I had front-row seats, along with the most unexpected ally I could have ever imagined, calm and unshakable, ready to turn the tables completely. The next morning, the air in the neighborhood was electric. It felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. I stepped outside cautiously, coffee in hand, and immediately noticed the tension. The guards were patrolling again, but their movements were slow, careful, almost unnatural. They glanced nervously at my driveway, their heads swiveling like they expected trouble at any second. The HOA president appeared a few minutes later, carrying his usual stack of papers, but this time he walked like he was on thin ice. I could tell he had been awake all night, trying to plan damage control. His smile was strained, forced, and it did nothing to hide the panic in his eyes. I braced myself. Today, the confrontation would reach its peak. "Good morning," he said cautiously, approaching my driveway. "I just wanted to, discuss last night." I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. My guest stood beside me, calm, composed, and unshakable. The president's eyes flicked to her, and for a second I could see his confidence drain. He cleared his throat. "I understand there were misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings?" I repeated, tilting my head. "You mean your guards assaulted my guest?" His smile faltered. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I glanced at my guest. She didn't say a word, just gave him a calm, piercing look that made him falter visibly. It was clear to everyone, the guards, the neighbors, and me, that the balance of power had shifted completely. "Look," I continued, keeping my voice steady, "you and your guards made a huge mistake, and I suggest you think carefully about how you handle things from here." The president shifted uncomfortably, his papers crumpling slightly in his hands. The guards glanced at each other nervously, clearly waiting for some kind of instruction or signal, but the presence of my guest made it impossible for them to act. The tension was so thick I could feel it pressing down on my shoulders. My guest finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen, let me be clear. Any further aggression or intimidation will have consequences, legal consequences. I suggest you reflect on your actions and adjust your approach immediately." The president swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming on his temple. The guards shifted, their postures stiff, guilty, and unsure of what to do next. It was mesmerizing to watch. For the first time, the authority they had wielded with such arrogance had completely evaporated. I felt a surge of vindication, but also a thrill of suspense. The situation wasn't over yet. They had to respond, and whatever response they chose would determine the next phase of this escalating drama. Neighbors peeked from behind hedges, cameras raised, whispering nervously. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. The president tried to regain composure. We just want to ensure that our community remains harmonious." I raised an eyebrow. Harmonious by attacking my guest. His shoulders slumped. He tried to form words, but my guest's gaze pinned him in place. It was clear he had no plan, no authority, no defense. The guards shuffled awkwardly, mumbling excuses under their breath, looking anywhere but at her. And then I noticed a subtle change. The president's face shifted from panic to desperation. He realized that there was no spinning this. No meeting, no email, no polite explanation could erase what had happened. He had been outmatched by someone he had underestimated completely. I stayed silent, letting the suspense hang. Neighbors were leaning over fences, some snapping photos, others whispering in disbelief. The street was quiet except for the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional cough from a nervous neighbor. The tension was palpable, almost unbearable, and yet electrifying. Finally, the president muttered something inaudible and turned to leave. The guards followed him reluctantly, glancing back nervously. I could see the relief on their faces mingled with lingering fear. The balance of power had shifted decisively, and everyone on the street had witnessed it. I exhaled slowly, my heart still racing. My guest remained calm, almost indifferent, but I could feel the lingering authority in her presence. It was clear that she had taught a lesson no one in the HOA would forget anytime soon. As the street returned to an uneasy quiet, I realized the aftermath was far from over. The guards would think twice before acting again. The president would be cautious, maybe even fearful. And the neighborhood had witnessed a complete reversal of power, all in the space of a single night. I turned to my guest, grateful but still in awe. "I don't know how you do it," I said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Sometimes people just need to remember who really holds the authority." I knew then that the showdown was over, at least for now, but the story, the drama, the tension, the whispers on the street, would ripple through the neighborhood for weeks, maybe months. And I had front-row seats to it all. The morning after the showdown felt surreal. The street was quieter than usual, but the air was thick with tension, whispers, and a strange sense of awe. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some cautiously waving, others pretending not to watch. It was clear that what had happened at my house the night before had left a mark, an impression that would linger far longer than anyone expected. I stepped outside with my guest, coffee in hand, scanning the neighborhood. The guards were back on patrol, but their posture was different, slouched, hesitant, eyes constantly flicking toward my driveway. It was like watching actors trying to play a role they no longer believed in. The once proud authority they wielded so aggressively had been dismantled in one evening. And all because of one guest who, calmly and effortlessly, reminded everyone who really held the power. The HOA president drove slowly past my house, papers clutched in his hands, face pale, his expression a mixture of defeat and fear. Neighbors whispered as he passed, some smirking, some shaking their heads. I could hear fragments of conversations. "Did you see him?" He looked terrified. "Finally, someone put him in his place." I chuckled quietly, taking a sip of coffee, savoring the moment. The neighborhood had witnessed a lesson in humility, and it was oddly satisfying. Inside, my guest and I sat down at the kitchen table. The tension of the previous night still lingered, but the adrenaline was fading, replaced by a strange calm. She looked at me, calm, composed, almost amused. "Sometimes people need a reminder," she said softly, as if speaking to herself. I laughed nervously. "A reminder? They'll probably be trying to rewrite the rules for months after this." She shrugged, smiling faintly. "Let them try, I'm not going anywhere." As the day went on, I started noticing subtle changes. The guards were more careful than ever, following rules to the letter, glancing around as if expecting another confrontation. The president avoided my house entirely, making phone calls and running meetings in the back of his mind, rather than stepping outside to assert any authority. The neighborhood seemed to have shifted in our favor, at least temporarily, and the ripple effect was obvious. Emails circulated, subtle gossip spread, and the whispers of the previous night grew louder. Some neighbors expressed admiration, some skepticism, and others outright envy. Every interaction reminded me that the power dynamic had changed. The guards had been humiliated, the president humbled, and I had a front-row seat to it all. The humor of the situation wasn't lost on me either. I caught myself laughing quietly at the absurdity. How a simple dinner invitation had escalated into a full-scale confrontation with the HOA, how two grown adults had been reduced to fearful stammering, and how my guest had done it all with a calm stare and a few words. It was ridiculous, yet exhilarating. Later that evening, I stepped out into the driveway once more. The neighborhood was quieter now, but the memory of last night's chaos lingered. The guards were nowhere in sight, and the president had retreated to his office. I felt a strange mix of relief and amusement. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone knew it. The tension remained, but it was now tinged with respect, or at least wariness. I turned to my guest and said softly, "Thank you. I don't know how I would have handled them without you." She smiled, calm as ever. "You did your part. Sometimes people just need someone to stand beside them, and sometimes they need a reminder of authority. Tonight, you had both." I laughed quietly, shaking my head. The situation was surreal. My quiet suburban life had transformed into something out of a dramatic comedy, complete with suspense, humiliation, and a reminder that authority is meaningless without respect. As night fell, the street returned to its quiet routine, but the whispers persisted. I knew the neighborhood would talk about this for months, retelling the story with added drama each time. The guards would never forget, the president would be careful forevermore, and I would have a story to tell for years. Sitting on my porch with my guest, sipping the last of the wine we had opened the night before, I realized something important. Life in a quiet neighborhood might seem predictable, but sometimes it only takes one unexpected visitor to turn everything upside down. The suspense, the drama, the humor, it all reminded me that control is fleeting, authority is fragile, and sometimes all it takes is the right person at the right time to reset the balance entirely. And as I watched the streetlights flicker on, illuminating the quiet suburban street, I felt a strange sense of triumph and amusement. The HOA had been humbled, the guards intimidated, and my guest. Well, she had reminded us all who really held the power. And for the first time in a long time, I could relax, knowing that sometimes justice, quiet, calm, and utterly effective, can arrive in the most unexpected form. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.